My name is Carmel Finlay, as Grace has said. I work with Teagasc in their Curriculum Development and Standards Unit. So Teagasc is, I suppose for anybody in the room, it's the Irish word for advice. So it's a state body that has a remit for advisory or extension services, research and education in the land-based sector and food industry. So I suppose some people might have been familiar with the film The Field. 80% of the students that go through our programme are agricultural based, and I suppose we have a long, maybe and complicated history in terms of land ownership in Ireland. And in terms of succession and inheritance to young farmers, it can be quite delayed because the land or the farm, it's associated with an identity for the farmer. So in many cases in Ireland, by the time the land comes to a younger person, they themselves may be in their 50s or their 60s, which is quite late in the European perspective. So in the 1980s in Ireland, there were some strategic government policies put in place, and it allowed for I suppose, incentives for farmers to acquire training. In Ireland at the moment, to be a farmer, you don't have to hold a qualification. However, the policies were quite strategic, and the incentives were quite good in that they encouraged people to undertake training so that they could avail of the tax incentives and the courses for farmers. So it's a very, very common term in Ireland. We talk about the green cert. So the first certificates were actually printed on a green piece of paper for young trained farmers, and believe it or not, for 40 years that has actually stuck, and we still talk about the green cert today. However, there are quite a lot of demands on young trained farmers now in terms of sustainability, water quality, health and welfare of their animals, and environmental sustainability. So it's quite a complex field. Now, for that young trained farmer, there's, I suppose, one alignment that if they hold a recognised qualification as set out by our Department of Agriculture or Revenue, it's very straightforward. So they just literally tick a box and they can say, yes, I'm a trained farmer because I hold X qualification. However, for other learners, what we're finding is RPL offers them, I suppose, an opportunity or a route to develop a pathway to a destination award. So a classic example is where you have a learner which has a lot of different types of learning, but they don't have that overall level 6 qualification, which is what is required for revenue purposes. And they may have the skills, they may have the knowledge, but yet when you're talking to them on their phone, you're saying, unfortunately, you just don't have that minimum qualification. So what we're able to say, well, the alternative route is to go through RPL. So I suppose the great advantage of RPL is it offers the learner a route. It enables them to identify their learning to date, what they've done, the skills that they've held, the competencies that they've acquired over a period of time. It does have to go into a portfolio, and I suppose ultimately for the learner, it'll go through as either a component award or an overall, what we call a full or major award in Ireland. The lessons I suppose we've learned through the RPL process is that we find it is really important to set out the expectations of the RPL process to the learner. Okay, no holds barred. It is a process, but I suppose what we find in our revisions of our documentation, it has to be clear, it has to be clear-cut for the learner what route they've to follow. And I suppose in doing that, it strengthens our policy and it strengthens our procedures. So we're continuously evaluating it. I suppose what I find for myself is that, right, if a learner is asking me, what does that question mean? It means I have to go back and maybe revisit it and say, well, right, if that learner doesn't understand the question, even though I thought it was a good question and I was trying to gather as much information as I could as possible, it's obviously just not hitting, the mark for the learner. So learner expectations are very important about the award standard, particularly in terms of practical skills training. In the Irish situation, a lot of people learn their skills from their parents. They'd have acquired a good set of skills, but in some cases the standard of the skills. So that's something we're very much aware of, because in the FET sector, usually most of the modules are 50-50 skills and practice. Again, it has to be integrated in your quality assurance processes. Most important are the people, the learner themselves, the participant, but also our mentors, our assessors, our subject matter experts. You can't hand a portfolio to a subject matter expert without giving them the context that they know about learning outcomes and they know about the standard of the award. And finally, I'm going to pick that middle point there for the learner, the significance in the value of the outcome to the learner. For some of them, they've maybe had a very negative primary and even secondary school experience. So this might be the first time that they're getting an award, and it carries a lot of weight for them. So we're always conscious to try to create a positive environment for the learner and I suppose ultimately the future farmers of Ireland. Okay, thank you.